Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Malloy, and this is 17.1, the Geography of Korea. This lecture today is going to correspond to pages 375 to 377 of your textbook, so I highly recommend that you also read that just to stay current. All right, well, have you ever tried kimchi? My roommate in college used to keep a large jar of it in the fridge, and before she finally explained what it was and let me try some, I have to say it was not something I knew much about. I actually asked her to put the jar inside of a paper bag because it resembled, in my opinion, at least at the time, something that you might encounter in a formaldehyde jar in your science lab. I am pleased to say that my roommate did finally change my mind about kimchi, and it is most tasty. Well, kimchi comes from Korea, and it's a spicy blend of putrid cabbage and other delights. I know that doesn't sound appetizing, but it is, really. You know, it's actually pretty awesome. Koreans eat kimchi with many of their meals, and sometimes even at breakfast. What I love about it is its versatility. You can eat it with so many other foods. So how did the Koreans come up with such an interesting delicacy? Well, believe it or not, it has a lot to do with their geography. See, we've already learned this year that geography sometimes dictates the foods we consume or the types of crops that are grown in a given area, and humans have had to adapt to their environments over time. Well, Koreans have adapted to the fact that the peninsula that they live on has a limited growing season, and the only part of the land, or only part of the land rather, can be used for farming. The Koreans have adapted to this obstacle by preserving their fresh vegetables for future use, like pickling and preserving the cabbage and other veggies found in kimchi. Kimchi is now a staple in most Koreans' diets. So today we're going to talk about the geography and how it has affected the Korean people over time. This is not just a lecture on kimchi, I promise. So let's start with Korea's location. Korea is actually one large peninsula that borders China and a very small portion of Russia. It borders the Yellow Sea to its west and the Korean Strait to its east. The Sea of Japan is to its east as well, but you should note that most Koreans call the Sea of Japan the East Sea. There are some historical reasons for that, which we'll get to later. There are two countries that make up the peninsula, North Korea and South Korea. People often say that the Korean peninsula has served as a bridge between China and Japan. China has been influencing Korea since 100 BC, and the developing culture then spread east to Japan. Korea's location has also made it a battleground for conflicts, including a Cold War conflict between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Korea served as a surrogate or substitute nation during the Cold War. The Soviet Union and the U.S. never fought head-to-head during the Cold War, if you recall. Instead, we got involved in surrogate nations and their conflicts. So the Korean War is a great example of this, and we're going to learn more about the Korean War in a later lecture. All right, well, let's talk about some of the landforms that you find in Korea. Korea is made up of mountains and plains. Its long coastline means that the sea plays an important role in the lives of many Koreans, with a dependency on fishing and trade. Steep mountains make up about 70% of the Korean peninsula. This can make farming a challenge at times. Its most well-known range is the Taebaek Range. North Korea is more mountainous than South Korea, and consequently has fewer people as well. Most people inhabit the farmable land along the coast, with only about 25% of people living in the mountainous regions. There are three main coastal plains areas where people live: the Northeast, the West Coast, and along the southern portion of Korea. The capital of Pyongyang in North Korea sits in the West Coast area. Seoul, the capital of South Korea, is also located in this area. It makes sense that big cities would emerge in this part of Korea because of the ability to farm on the land. With over 6,000 miles of coastline and plenty of harbors for ships, many Koreans earn their living in the fishing industry. South Korea has been ranked as high as third in the world for fishing, following Japan and China. Japan and Korea have not always, however, had the best relationship, and even today they are fierce competitors when it comes to fishing. In terms of climate, Korea is considered a temperate region, meaning hot summers and cold winters, not unlike what we experience here in Rochester. North Korea has a much harsher climate overall due to the mountains. There's a longer growing season in South Korea than in North Korea and can harvest, or the South Koreans can harvest more crops each year as a result. See, 60% of the land in South Korea is farmable or arable. Only about 20% of the land in North Korea can be farmed. This means that North Korea is at a distinct disadvantage when it comes to overall food production. If a natural disaster hits North Korea, destroying crops, people are far more likely to suffer from the effects. We will talk about a massive famine that hit North Korea during the 1990s due to a natural disaster and crop failure. It was devastating. The main advantage North Korea has over South Korea is its supply of mineral resources in its mountains. North Korea contains large amounts of coal, iron, lead, copper, and zinc. All of these materials are needed for industrialization. Additionally, many rivers flow out of North Korea's mountains, and they are solid sources of hydroelectric power. North Korea hasn't been able to fully harness all of these resources, and we'll learn more about why this is throughout the unit. North Korea is still developing a basic infrastructure that would allow for him to harvest many of those resources. In terms of education, Koreans enjoy a 95% or higher literacy rate, although these numbers most likely reflect the South Korean population because much less is known about the North Korean population. Korea is what we call a homogeneous society. So what does this mean, homogeneous? Well, homogeneous means that the people share a common ethnic and cultural background. In addition to an ethnic background that differs from the Chinese mainland, their language is also unique as well. Korean is also a very different language from Japanese as well. Okay, so Korean is neither Japanese or Chinese. It's a very unique language with its own alphabet. So we're going to talk more about that during our next lecture. So what have we learned today, really? Well, we know that Korea's homogeneous society and culture has been profoundly influenced by its geography, allowing it to develop its own language that is unrelated to Chinese or Japanese. Additionally, the Korean diet has also reflected the limitations of its geography and has resulted in the development of preserved foods like kimchi. Korea has served throughout history as a bridge between China and Japan, and much of Korea's unique way of life is reflected in its dependence on fishing and the sea. Thanks for listening. Bye.